and welcome to this episode of Where is Our World Going? Today, we have a chance to chat with Karen, a university scholar studying environmental science. Karen has learned about a variety of environmental issues, such as global climate change, loss of biodiversity, and freshwater pollution. But today, she's going to tell us about an effect of the increasingly pressing issues of food deserts. Karen, tell us, what are food deserts?
Hello! Thanks for having me. So, food deserts are really interesting because they're not necessarily areas where there's just a shortage of food, like one would expect. Rather, a food desert is an area where there's a shortage of nutritional foods at an affordable price, like fruits and vegetables, that are a part of a healthy diet.
That is interesting. Kind of a misleading phrase, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if there's not a total shortage of food, what kind of foods are in food deserts? And why don't these areas have access to healthy foods?
That's a great question. A quote-unquote food desert tends to have a high concentration of fast food chains where people can access greasy, salty, unhealthy foods as well as processed food from convenience stores, and a shortage of supermarkets with fresh produce, or at least a limited selection in the markets that they do have. Many times, the healthy food options that they do have access to are sold at a higher cost than their unhealthy counterparts, which is a major factor when people are choosing what to buy, especially in the communities that are most affected by this issue.
Are there certain communities who find themselves in food deserts more often than others?
Yes. More often than not, communities of color or low-income communities have a harder time accessing adequate food. Wealthier communities have 3 times the amount of supermarkets than low-income communities, and those who live in communities without easy access to a supermarket often have to travel pretty far to get to one.
So these food deserts must be concentrated in rural and urban areas then?
Yes, to some extent, but often low-income areas and urban areas experience a lack of healthy options because the supermarkets located around them have a significantly reduced variety of food options, and those living in low-income areas don't have the means to get to the supermarket in the neighboring towns.
This is so awful to hear about. I have never had a guest come on and talk about something like this before, but it sounds pretty common.
They're actually more prevalent than you would think, and they're actually considered a national crisis. In fact, some areas of Chicago, New York, and even as close as Detroit are considered food deserts.
So, you say it's a widespread problem in the United States. How is it a problem for the environment?
That's a great question. The availability of fresh food in these areas affects the environment in a few different ways. First off, there's a lot more single-use plastics and other non-biodegradable packaging involved in the packaging of these foods. Most of this packaging ends up in landfills and in oceans. Secondly, the argument could be made for how pesticides used on foods aren't healthy for you or the environment, which means it contributes to the problem we call food deserts. Remember, we defined a food desert as a place with little to no access to fresh, healthy, and affordable food. Finally, one could also make the argument that the transportation of fresh food to rural and urban areas adds to the carbon emissions of the truck delivering these foods.
That is a serious problem. Can you tell me about how the issue of food deserts affects you personally?
Well, actually, one of my very good friends, Quin, lives with their family in a food desert in Detroit and has personally experienced the effects it can have on them growing up and on their family. I actually brought them with me today. They are willing to share their experiences.
It would be so interesting to hear from Quin.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on the show.
I'm honored. Karen and I have been talking about the issue of food deserts, and I have learned so much about them. It's amazing to me that more people are not talking about this. What is one thing that you wish people knew?
Honestly, I just want them to hear stories like that of my family, or some of the other people in my neighborhood. If they knew what things were like for us, then I think they would be more interested in supporting solutions for change.
It sounds like you feel really passionately about this. Can you tell me a little more about what your experience has been like?
Sure. When I was little, I remember me and my brothers walking with my mom to the grocery store, and it was like 3 miles away. That was before we got a car. but we would have to do that once every week or so, and it would take the whole day. We would go on Saturday or Sunday, and we would get our groceries, and the 3 of us would all have to carry a lot of bags back to our houses, another 3 miles. It was exhausting. Mom is such a health nut, though. Sometimes the market wouldn't have everything we needed when we'd go, so she'd have to go after work on Tuesday when they get their delivery. One time, we had to eat McDonald's for 3 days straight, and she actually cried. She's big on health, and I really respect that. It's a huge blessing that we have a car now, too. But still, it makes me so sad to see it sometimes, you know. My mom should not have to cry over food.
Right. It's just food. It should be accessible for everyone.
I agree. Everyone should be able to get the food they need. I read somewhere that we produce way more food than we would need to feed all of humanity. So why is there no food in my hometown?
Good question. Let's throw that out to our listeners. Leave us a comment with what you think could be done to get food into places that need it.
Can I just say one thing that I really admire about Quin is how you always try to help other people. They're looking at getting a job on an urban farm where they can help produce more food.
That is amazing.
Well, it's mostly a job. It's my passion to help people, and I think agriculture is interesting. But my work on the farm is not the only solution. They've got these mobile grocery stores going up around the country, and I think that is so cool.
I've wondered about solutions to this problem, but I've never heard of these. What are they?
So there's this nonprofit one called Fresh Express that delivers fresh produce to Tampa and Phoenix, Arizona, and there's another one called Green Cart that's in New York City.
Mobile grocery services are a cool idea. Can you tell me more about how they work?
Sure. So Fresh Express is a nonprofit, like I said, so it buys fresh produce from farmers, and then it sells it for the same price to all kinds of places, like apartment buildings, schools, and senior centers.
But if they don't make any money at all, how do they afford to run the trucks?
They're funded purely by donations, grants, and sponsorships.
Wow, that is really amazing. I love hearing about the good that people do because it's really easy to forget when there's so much negativity circulating.
People can definitely be good. That's why I love hosting this podcast, because I can make good people aware of issues that they might not know about. It is my hope that they'll use their good peopleness to help. Quin, tell us about the other service you mentioned. Green Cart?
Yeah, so that one's in New York, and Columbia University actually did a study on it, which was pretty influential.
They sound like they could be very helpful, kind of like putting little supermarkets closer to people. That would be great to implement in other food deserts across the world. I feel like I've learned a lot from talking to you two today, Quin and Karen. It is great to be informed about the issues facing our world so that we can work together towards a solution. Thank you for all of our listeners. Make sure you email, tweet, or DM us on our social media with your plans to create a more sustainable world and how you are going to work towards an end to food deserts. This has been Where Is Our World Going? Now, go out and change the world.
Bye!
Bye.